Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 prakim Rambam, Hilchos, Erechin, Vacharamim, Prakim, Beis, Gimel, and Dalet. We are starting with the second chapter with Perek Beis. We're going to have more details of this unique type of pledge toward the Bedek Havayis for the temple, known as an Erech or Erechin. We're going to be speaking about someone who makes partial pledges. We're going to have scenarios where, when you have a doubt what a certain expression means, since Erech is also in the category of Nidarim, and the rule of Nidarim is Tam, Nidarim Lahachmir. So when in doubt, we're going to be Machmir. But when that person who made the pledge passes away, and now the children are obligated to pay their father's pledge, we view this in the category of Safek Mammon. How much money do you owe? How much money do you owe? The general rule is we're going to be lenient. Yavaldik. And Bachlal, we're going to have interesting scenarios from where we see that when money is designated for tzedakah, it may be used for something that is on the similar level or even for a higher level, but we don't go down the level, as this will express itself in this chapter, Perek Beis. It's a relatively small chapter. It has 13 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph. Says that Rambam Ho'omer Erech Yodi. I pledge the erech, again, he uses the words erech, of my hand. Torah doesn't give such a number. Either mine or the options are yes or no. Erech or ragli, or I'm going to give the erech of my eyes. Or whether he focuses that on someone else. Or a nov, the erech of his eyes is upon me. Says that Rambam loy amar klum. Loy amar klum means that statement is of no consequence. However, if he speaks about a limb with which one cannot live without, erech libi, I pledge the erech of my heart, I pledge the erech of my liver, of my kaved, or of someone else, erech liboy, or kaved shel pliny olai. Now, yes, nois and erech kuloi. Techein kol evet she'im yinatel menachai. Yamos imamar erkoi olai noisen erach kuloi. Gewaltig. Halacha Beis.
Does Rambam tell us what those are?
No, but we know. Do we always make a correlation? I think we do. Yeah. Very good. Amar chatzi erki olai. Guys, the nuance is meduyak. I pledge half my erech. Such a statement is a statement, and he has to give chatzi erkoi. So if he's a male and he's at the age where you got to pay, let's say, the highest amount, 50 shkolim, such a pledge means chatzi erki, 25. However, if he says, listen to these words, it sounds the same, but it's not, erech chatzi olai, I pledge the erech of half of myself. Can you live with only half of yourself? No, right? So we just learned that if you make a pledge regarding the heart, just the heart, you have to pay erech kuloi. So this will fall into that category. Noisen erech kuloi, because she after she not chatzioi and veyichia gavaldik. No, it's based on the principle that he laid out in halacha Aleph. Now, in contrast, as we learned yesterday, if a person makes a normal pledge by saying, "I give the worth," not erech, which is the magical word, and then you evaluate how much that person is worth in the slave market. So now let's apply it to our partial pledges chapter. I pledge the worth of my hand. Right? So now it's not like we had an halacha Aleph, loy amar klum. Yes, amar klum. Shaman oisi kamu hu shava b'yad, kamu hu shava b'lo yad, the noisin lahegdish, and it's not the way you think. How much is it work with a hand, without a hand in the slave market? That Alan explains how this works. Ketzah. If they make an evaluation that had this person been sold in a slave market as he is wholesome in body, he would be worth 50. But if, now listen to this, not sold without a hand, not because the hand is cut off. It's a different cheshbon. What is that interesting sale of a slave? So he's being sold to the master number 2. Master number 1 retains the rights of the work based from his right hand. In other words, the right hand belongs l'Rabbi Rishon. That's the meaning. How much would you pay then? You would pay 40. The Rambam is making that point. Because if a person would be b'chlal missing a hand, I'm assuming he would be worth even less than that. Person on a hand, he's wounded. No, you're not wounding him.
So it's a cool.
You're going to be paid less money to Hegdish. Yeah. Nimsa zeh yischayv l'shalom lehegdish. A lesser amount of money. Very good. V'chein kol chayoytze b'zeh. Halacha dalet. Ha'omer demei roishi. I pledge the worth of my head. I pledge the worth of my liver, or his head, his liver. Again, like we learned in Halacha Aleph, can't live without your head. Some people do, but theoretically you can't at least. Listen to me, kuloy. V'chein ha'omer demei chetzi olai demei. I'm sorry. Dalet is demei, not erech. Because that's even by worth. You would be worth nothing, right, if your head, I think that's the pshat. Making the same cheshbon in halacha gimel, if a person were to sell a slave, but say his head belongs to Rabbi Rishon, the guy wouldn't pay for it. It's mamish like erech. Then like erech. Halacha, hey, I pledge my weight, or I pledge so-and-so's weight. Now here's the trick. The problem is that this guy did not specify the weight of what. So you pay his weight. Now if the guy said the weight in silver, the weight in gold, I'm a chaya. At least the person specified. But if the guy says, oh, let's go further before we get, if he didn't say, the weight of my arm, the ragli yolai, and the noisin mimincha paid again if he specified silver or gold. But you have to estimate how much does the hand weigh. Interestingly, here yad refers from the tips of your finger only until the atzil, until the elbow. The regel here refers until the knee. In other areas in halacha, the word yad, the word regel refers to a lesser amount or to a more amount. Nedarim goes on its own track because by nedarim, when people say yad, they mean forearm. When people say regel, they mean the lowest part of the foot, and they don't include the thigh. Now, what happens if the guy didn't specify that? Rambam is going to get there in a moment. But before that, we're giving other types of pledges. If a person says, Koimasi olai, I pledge my height, and he specifies in silver. Problem over here is weight is weight. Person weighs 180 pounds. Person weighs 280 pounds. You give that weight. How do you give the weight of the pledge of height? In other words, how do you monetize that? Is it a little stick? Is it a slab of wood? So if he says Kesef Esav, so you take a scepter and you make it according to the height of the person. Now, how thick does the scepter have to be? Only enough for it not to bend when it's in the height of that person. And again, here again, we're still speaking about at least he specified silver or gold. If he says, Meloi koimasi olai, he added the words Meloi, which was not needed, right? The full extent of my height. So this extra word actually came to diminish the amount of money he's pledging. Even if the scepter is so thin that when you stand it up to the height of the person, it can bend over, but it's maloi, it is his height. No, he specified, he added the word to minimize the standard of the scepter. Atkan, at least, even though he spoke vague, but he said silver or gold or copper or whatever. What happens? He's making a pledge to give. I'm giving my way to the temple, but he didn't say me'ezamin. Very interesting halachas. So what do we do over here? Says the Rambam, I don't know how you again. These terms are halachic terms, and I don't know. It's our generation. What does it mean? Very wealthy. I don't know. But if he's very wealthy, according to some, the vav, I have a vav which should not be here. I don't know if you have a vav over there. So then we say Yeah, you have a vav with that. Then we say nischavin lematana meruba. We presume halachically he meant of the most expensive metal, which is gold, and he gives that weight in gold. That's a lot of money, right? Give how much is 180 pounds of gold? That's a nice donation. If he didn't specify, so we say if he's usher b'yoser, he gives zahav. If he's not very wealthy, so listen to what we do. What will be acceptable is even to give the weight of apples. But 1 second, so what do we do? So the Rambam says further, so what do we do is, there has to be an evaluation made according to the person's wealth. Vidati means some people are very wealthy, but they're very stingy. Some people are not wealthy yet at all, but they're very generous. So we have to make this type of estimation between the wealth, between the person's da'as. Da'as here means his character, kamsin or a nadiv. And we can determine from the cheapest to the gold. But if he's very wealthy, then he has to give out a gold. Or halacha 8. I'm smiling, just imagining this dentoid over here. How that would look like.
Rabbi.
Yes.
If you're living in a time where there's another metal that's more expensive than gold, would the Rambam say you still give gold, or you give maybe, I don't know?
No, you will give the most expensive material.
Got it.
And the psychology here is that a person wants to declare that I belong to God. I'm giving my weight to God. I'm giving my height to God. When they were inspired. And then when you have to write out the check, that's the way of the world. Then the animal soul begins to give an opinion and says, take it easy. That's the inner machloikis. What exactly did you pledge? Okay, halacha 8. I pledge my standing. I pledge my sitting. I pledge the place where I sit. Rach bi'olai, I pledge my width. I pledge my circumference, my 34 belt, my 38 belt size of waist. So the Gemara explains how each one of these statements could have various meanings. And the Gemara doesn't come, it's called the Bayid Olay Yefshata. And therefore, an interesting way to determine. So the Beis Din begins to push the person by suggesting that he meant that which will demand a greater amount of money. And where do they stop pushing him? When he says, no, that for sure I didn't have in mind. Very interesting way. Because if there's a doubt on the pledger, then the Beis Din says, well, maybe he means this. And if the guy is quiet, but the moment they hit a number where they say, no, that I know, that I didn't mean. That is ruled out. The imes, now we go the opposite. All of these times where we have a doubt, and even in the earlier halachas, we didn't specify the metal. So, hakol lefi mamayna v'datoi. Hakol lefi mamayna v'dati means we don't demand of him to give the minimum amount. We're pushing him to give more. That's only if he's living to fulfill his pledge. But as we learned yesterday, that after a person makes such a pledge, if they pass away, then the heirs have to pay up their pledge, but the halachic rules completely change. We say now, why? Like we said, b'yachas to the vower, safik nedarim lahachim. That's a big cloud. B'yachas to the yarshim, they didn't make the pledge. They're chayiv mammon. When it comes to mammon, there's a rule, safik mammon lahachim, based on the concept of amaytze mechaveri, all of arayim.
Also, if he's alive, I could say,
so Rabbi Yaakov is saying another thing. When the guy is alive, the fact that he's allowed to say loy lekach nischavanti allows us to push him on a higher number because he can counter it and we'll give him that credibility. Since the Yarshim don't have the right to say loy lekach niskavanti, of course loy lekach niskavanto, loy dibarto, you didn't make the pledge. So we have to be a lot more cautious. Cautious for the side of the vower. Very good. Halacha test. I pledge a silver coin. So what's the minimum coin? Even though there were coins that were smaller than the dinner coins. he has to give it. We say a person didn't mean to give less than the dinner coin of kesef, or if he says matbeya zahav, there it's a different coinage. He should not give less than a coin called a ma'a kesef. If he says I pledge to give iron, you know what was a typical iron pledge in the Holy Temple on the roof? They had that crow amakalia. The word will come to me unless the Rambam writes it. They had the crow chasers. So they had these pointy, there was a pointy roof on the temple. So if certain birds were to come and try to rest or to nest, and that would make it very unclean, they would be hurt and they would go away. And they were different, there were squares of 1 amma by 1 amma, and it was made out of barzel. So we say this guy had a 9 mi amal amal kola oidev. That's the raven destroyer that was on the Mikdash, on top, on the roof, as we'll explain when we'll speak about the building of the temple. Or Zahav, it's upon me to give silver, upon me to give gold. And he didn't mention a coinage. So then he should not bring a coin. He didn't mean a coin. He meant a slab. How big should the slab be? How big should the brick be? You push him. You suggest. And the guy says, no, that not. Zoisloy. Like a dance. When he made the pledge, he said how much weight. So he also is allowed to say, no, I for sure did not pledge that. Halacha Yudalef. Echot ho'emer domi olai, or demei ploni olai, oy ho'emer harei olai moneh, oy chamishim, oy kesef, oy zav. All of these types of pledges are in the category of chayavei domim, monetary obligations. Unlike erech, in other words, erech is this unique word that if you use that word, the Torah tells you exactly how much you're chayav based on age and gender. Both domim, monetary obligations, and the special magical erech type of monetary obligation, to what does the money go to? To the temple upkeep. Now, says the Rambam, there was also, guys, don't forget, there was the half a shekel obligation on every male. Women also optionally participated. Sometimes parents paid for their children, and that made its way to the Lishkas HaGozes, and it was used for Korbanos Tzibur, which is not Bedek HaBayis. Now we want to know whether we can use from one lishka for the other. Says that Rambam Halach Yud Beis, there were 2 chambers. We're speaking about chambers in which money was kept. One is called Lishkas Hashoyim, the chamber of the secret gifts. How beautiful is that? As the Rambam will explain. And one is called Lishkas HaKelim. Now, Lishkas Hashoyim, I got ahead of myself before we get to the Sumas HaLishka. Before that, right? What was the chamber of the secret gifts? Yerechet. People that were living in awe of God, and automatically they didn't sin. They were very special people. They were not looking to get honors. They would place things in this chamber of the secret chamber. They would put things in there, and poor people would go in there and they would take whatever they needed. And the beauty here is that when someone, not like when they would remove communal. And there you have to have all these precautions. The beauty is that when someone walked into the chamber, no one felt ashamed that I'm the one coming to receive. Maybe you're coming to give. No one knew. The fact that there was something there to receive is something very telling on the Jewish people. In other societies, that the chamber would be empty. People would take the walls off. I don't know. Here, people came and gave, and people came and took. The Lishkas HaKelim, Kol Mishi is not the Keli. If you pledged a thing, then you would throw it in there. And what would they do? And once in 30 days, then the temple treasurers would go in there. They would open it up. And this is what they would do with the things that were in there. This is not a bank account. This is stuff. A guy gave a chair. He gave a table. If the actual utensil has use in the temple, so then why would they sell it and buy it? They have it. They would leave it there. Everything that they couldn't directly use in the temple, for whatever purpose, they would sell, and now the funds would fall again into the lishkas by the kabayas. That's what we're getting to. In other words, the Rambam was trying to tell you that the entry to the list to the Berek Habayis' fund wasn't only from Damim and from Erechin, which obliged the donor to give geld. some kalim also were turned into funds for the Bedek Habayis. Now, Yud Gimel, now we're coming. Now let's go. So now we had this half a shekel fund, and it was used for communal karbanis. And as we learned the details that they used to go in there, they would remove it 3 times a year with the caleb, all of these gimel, with all the details.
Kochi is bad, Kochi Bedek Habayis.
Nakuda.
That's it. And there was Lishkat Chashayim and Lishkat.
That's right. So you're saying that Lishkas HaKelim is linked to Bedek Habayis. Lishkas Chashoyim, they never sold because it was a tzedakah fund, not for the temple, for Aniyim. Oh, now, and what were to happen if there isn't enough funds in the half a shekel fund? So the din is moitziin esaroy lahem ikochi bedek habayis. No, one is allowed to use from the funds that are designated for the bedek habayis for another need that is considered holier. Mailan Bakoidish, because the Mizbeach is Chmamish the Mizbeach. There's no greater kedusha than putting things on the altar, but not the other way around. So then they were not allowed to take funds of the half a shekel to use it for the Bedek Habayis because we are lowering the level of kedusha. Gewaldig. Pedic Gimel last 20 halachas. What we will learn over here is the final pedic about Erechin, and we did touch upon it in the first chapter, and that is the din of Yehesikiyah. Now, normally, let's go ben Adam Lachaveda. If I owe you money, you loan me $100, and when you come to collect, I say Echanish, ainly, I owe you the money. When I'll have the money, I'll have to pay you. One of the unique laws of Erechin is that there are times that when the pledger is being estimated by the Beis Din, and they're going to determine that he now ein loy, we'll see in which cases he gets to fulfill his pledge only with that which he has. The minimum amount that I'll have to give is a seller. If he doesn't even have a seller, then he doesn't pay it down. And if all of a sudden he gets a lot of money, he owes all of the pledge. Masha Enkin, let's say if the guy has a seller or 2 salayim, then when they make this ha'amada badin, and they determine, this guy only has a seller or 2, he pays the seller, and he fulfilled his pledge. And even if he becomes wealthy later, he's not chayiv to pay anymore. That will be the gist of the chapter with all of the pratim of how we make this estimation.
We have an exact concept of this in American law.
Which is called
a debtor's examination.
A debtor's examination. They took it from the title.
And they say you only did this, and then you go to your whole debt.
Gewaldig.
Debtor's exam. They go to the judge.
There you go, guys. Debtor's exam. Halacha. They should also learn from the Torah. You should not murder. Nothing wrong. You should not steal. Don't commit crimes. Have police. Pedi Gimel has 20 halachas. Halacha aleph. Hamarich es hapochris mi ben esrei. So, one of the things we learn, age and gender. What's one of the cutoff the ages? 20 years. So listen to this. The guy who pledges, right, whether he pledged his erech or someone else's erech, when he made the pledge, that person was less than 20. Now the guy is going to fulfill his pledge. And the first step will be is that there is a certain ha'amada b'din. You go in front of a Beis Din and you say, this is what I said. This is where I'm at financially. How much do I owe? When he stood b'din, the person that was the subject of the erech vow now is more than 20. So the question is, the number is based on age and gender, but age, is it when the age of the pledge, when you made the pledge, or is it the age when you stand and get this judgment? Why? That's klal number 1 in this chapter. In other words, we define the age based on the time that the pledge was made and not when this person is coming to stand in front of the court. Halacha number 2. Kol ha'arachim ha'ketzuvin b'Torah hein shenoisen hamarich only yemaya ashin. Ashin means, guys, not like we had in the previous chapter, not an American trillionaire. Ashin means that when he's coming to pay the pledge, he has the funds to pay the pledge that he made. Could be he pledged a nekeva that was 31 days old, 3 shkolim. In this context, it means he has the 3 shkolim. But when he's coming to pay the pledge, when there's Hamad Abadin, at that point, he's poor, meaning the Ein Yodam Aseges doesn't have the means. So the din is, if that's now, how do you determine that? We're going to see in this chapter, many people have no cash flow, but they're very wealthy people. We're going to figure out how to determine whether he's halachically unable to pay. But if that is determined, then Noisim Kolanim Sabayadi, then he gives what he could, all the way down from the highest number, whatever that, until a seller. In other words, if he even only has one cell now, if he has two saloim and his pledge was of 5, he'll give 2. It's not that if he doesn't have for the pledge, you pay seller. You pay what you could, minimum seller, vinifter. That's psukim, that's explicit. In Pashas B'chokaisai, as it says, if he's too poor to pay the erech, al pi asher kasik yadanoidim, then he should pay according to his capacity. According to his capacity, doesn't mean a seller. It means less than what he pledged. Now, how do we know that he has to pay a seller? Which will then mean, first the question is, not how do you know that he doesn't pay less than a seller? How do you know that if you're taking a seller, he'll have nothing left? That you can do that. Shekel and seller are intertwined words. As we know, it cannot be more than 50 because the male, like we said, the age and gender highest number will be 50. So for 50, the Rambam doesn't have to bring a rayim. The point is, b'shekel hakodesh dafka lo shenyor. Now, what happens? If he doesn't even have the seller, you can't take less than a seller. Like we just said, it has to be a minimum a seller. No, since he's not fulfilling his pledge, Eli Yishoel, not a seller. Everything, the full age, gender number is a chayv. And now ve'im matzayada v'hesher yitin erech sholem akasu b'toira gevaldig. Now nuance. What happens? Allah Ashir. When he pledged, he was an Ashir. And now he's an Ani. Ani means before he stood in front of the coin, he became impoverished. So when he's going to come to the Hamad Badin, he's an Ani, or the opposite. When he made the pledge, he was an Ani. Same thing. When he stands in front of the kohen, in front of the Bezdin, it's a Bezdin of Kahanim. Now he's an Ashir. In both cases, listen, the only exception we'll know is we need for him to be an ani, both when he made the pledge and when. Now, guys, make no mistake. In the case where Asher sheherich ve'ha'ani, they're going to tell him you're chai 50. The guy only has a seller, seder, then he owes 49. I'm not going to take what you don't have. Question is, when do you get away by
49 or what?
No, when the Rambam is saying Asher sheherich and now ve'ha'ani, the first case in Allah. So we're paskening that he's chai ve'erech Asher. Don't forget, he's standing in front of the Bezdin. It's the Hanani. Let's say right now we can only afford to pay 2 out of the 50.
And we don't do the calculation in halacha base.
Then we don't do the calculation on halacha base. The din of halacha base clearly is that he was an ani both when he made the pledge and when he's standing within. All I'm saying is that even when we had a chai ve'erech Asher doesn't. If he doesn't have, what do? You take what he has, and the rest he owes. Now, if when he made an erech, he was an ani, and in between him pledging and standing in front of the Bezdin, there was a moment of wealth. The stock market went up, and then it went back down again. Here we say noisen erech ani, which is great. In other words, what we're looking for is he must be an ani, both at the point of the pledge and at the point. When it comes to the age, you understand, we don't say that. Halacha Aleph says the age goes only based on the time of the pledge. When it comes to this ani asher, beidem halacha vav asher shamar erki olai oy erech ploini olai. Now he's an asher. Now listen, shama ani, a poor man. He was poor when he made the statement. This guy is poor straight. And all he said was, Masha Amar Zeh Olai. He didn't say the words Erech. Masha Amar Zeh, I'm also going to give. Harei ha'ani chai be'erech Asher, which is the Erech Sholem. Why? Because this is not a din of Erechin. this is a din of all other pledges to the temple. If a guy makes a pledge, not Erechin, guys, if a person pledges, I'm giving to the base, I make $100. If the guy doesn't have, he doesn't have, but he owes the $100. He has $1, pay $1. Now you owe 99. But if he uses the words Erechin, happens to be that the poor man says Erech zeh, that means the usher olai. That's different. Because he used the words Erech, even though the principle upon the pledge was from the ani. It doesn't matter, it was from an usher. You pledged it. All right. Halacha zayin. The guy doesn't have the money. Then I'm just spelling out what we spoke out by heart. Now we say, even if he becomes wealthy afterwards, he's not chayv to pay. Like we have in halacha hey, even though he won't pay it because he doesn't have it. In other words, the Rambam was just speaking out what we said. The Norvas then pay what you could, but you're not out. You still owe the rest. The person explicitly mentions the sum of the erech. He's not going against the Torah, but he's saying erki alai chamishim shkalim. And we're speaking about a guy that's he's male and he's within the age. Had he only said erki alai, it would have been 50 shkalim. But this guy is adding the number. Or erech ploinis alai, the highest value for the female gender is 30 slime. Even though they said the words erech, since they added the number, and if they're ani, they're not going to pay it because they don't have it, but that's just a technical thing, but they owe it.
Considered not an error?
Even though not an erech, because they gave the number. The din of hesek yad is only when the only words that were used in the pledge was erech.
You have a chov of erechin or you have a chov of damin?
You have a chayv of like, it's like dummy.
Like damin.
There's no hesek yet. Now, if a guy says dummy olai, right, or demei pleni olai, b'chlal eino nidan behesek yet. Shechayavi damim hey perishu nidran. V'hareihem kibishu amen mana olai hegdish. We have to give a mana gamur, and even if you don't have it, that's fine, but you'll owe it. Very good. Halacha yud. Ha'omer harei olai erech stam v'loi peidesh.
Was there a payment limit, like a timeline of when you need to make good on your?
So that I'm writing halacha ale, very good. Bal ta'acher l'shalmoi. Bal ta'acher l'shalmoi. We had this. I'm not mistaken in Perikation.
Yeah, Karbanis, we had like 3.
So we paskin that after 3. I forgot how that I'm. There's 5 shitas in Tanoim. That's in the beginning of Rosh Hashanah and in other places. If let's say if the most lenient is the 3 Yom Tovim, yeah. However, you get the bal ta'acher. Yeah.
If you get to that point, you don't have money.
So then you're an oinus rachmana patre, but you owe it.
Still owe it.
There you go. Halacha. Ha'omer harei olai erech stam and v'loi peresh. See, listen. The guy, when I say erki, okay, a male or female, what age am I? It's a fact. But if the guy doesn't say who's erech, you get the problem. He just says harei olai erech. So is it the highest possibility or is it the lowest possibility? That's the question. So the din is einoi kimefarish shloisha shkolim. It's not considered as if he said the smallest amount. We don't say that.
So he's rich and he owes 50. Is that the idea?
Even though we learned in Perek Aleph Halacha Chav that he pays the smallest amount. Even though we say he pays the smallest amount, but if he doesn't have the 3 shkolim, not when he said these words, not when he coming to pay, we're not going to say, oh, now you only have 1 shekel, pay the 1 shekel and you're good to go. We don't say that. You will this leniency of hesek yad doesn't apply to the din of erech stam, even though we say erech stam is 3 shkolim. Very good. Halacha yudal. Ha'omer erki olai. Then he repeats. And now listen to this. He said it twice. Put on your thinking brains. Now, really, you should have paid the first one first. But the case here is that the Kohen, for some reason, was dealing with the second one first. This guy is unable to give his entire pledge. I don't have it on me. And you know what? Come over here. Maybe I don't think so. But Nosan Teisha Lishne, guys, listen to what's going on over here. This guy cannot fulfill both of his pledges. The Kohen decides to make a Hamad B'din. Let's see, what can you pay for your second pledge? One thing is clear: the Kohen cannot tell him at least pay all of what you have for the second pledge. The Kohen cannot tell it to him. Why? Because really he's obligated to pay the first pledge first. What's the minimum amount you have to pay for a pledge? The minimum, 1 seller. So 1 seller has to be left for the first. So all he really has, like one is like lien for the first. So what does he have? Halachically 9. So if he gave 9 to the second, and then he gave 1 seller for the first, then you fully paid your pledge. However, shaharachin are not like chayvus. Sha'af al pi shekol ma shebiyadim mishubad lo rishayna. You would argue, hold on, how can you even pay down the second? Let's say the first pledge was for a male gender, he owes 50. The guy doesn't have even for 1 pledge. But we don't say, since you should pay the first one first, so you were not allowed to give anything for the second. That we don't say. The Kohen decided to evaluate the second. You get to pay the second first. Elamai, you also get to leave at least 1 for the first. That you get to do. So you gave all that you had for the second. You gave the minimum amount for the first. You covered your bases. So we don't say, but the rule of Hegdish Ma'uchar is our case. You paid your second pledge first. That's a good collection. But if this guy would have given 9 for the first, you get that? You can't do that. I know you're poor. I know you can't pay the 50, but you got to pay everything that you have. If they would have judged the first one first, then paying 9 for the first is not kosher. Now, paying 1 for the second would have been de facto okay. Yotzi de shniya, because all he gave the seller, and he had nothing. He had nothing else. But because Sharei Kol Mashabiyadi is Meshubad L'Rishayim, and therefore Shinasan Atesha Nishalei Sela Ashalei Nesanai. So what do we do now? So you're gonna, that's the biggest chiddush. What are you gonna think? You know what you're gonna think? Tell you you're gonna think. You're gonna think, oh, okay, you really should have paid 10. How much did you pay? 9. So Shuki, how much do you owe?
1.
We don't say that. If you didn't pay all of what you had, then your original chiyuv, let's say of 50 shkalim, is still upon you.
41 left.
And now if you become wealthy, you got to pay the 41. The fikach yishod all of shad ha'erech hadishan at sheyashir, and you have to pay all of what you owe. Halacha yudbeis. Ha'omer shnei arachim olai. I pledged 2 of my erechs. He said it together. He doesn't have to pay it. He has less than that. Now, here again, what did we just learn? Theoretically, you pay down the first, and you won't have anything left for the second. Or pay down the first entirely and pay down 1 for the second. Here, if the money that you have is automatically leaned equally to both because you were koilel it together, and if that would be the case, and you're good, and you're out in a good way, the apatin, pay for the first one, and Danny, b'diavad, you can pay for the second one. In other words, you can pay for the second one as long as you leave. Maybe you have to leave 1 seller for the first one. That's something that's a doubt. The Rambam doesn't say, and now what? All he's pointing out is that that's something that the Gemara did not come to any conclusion. A person sets aside his erech or damav. Very important rule. If I designate this animal for a carbon, not harei olai, Harezu, and the animal was lost or stolen, the loss is the temple's loss. What do we do? Here a guy says Harei, but now he designated the money. Whether it is erech or a monetary pledge to the temple, and the money is stolen, the money is lost. Even if he did not say the word olai, by karbanos, that's the cutoff between neder and nadav. Neder harei olai, nadav hareizu, neder chay b'achrais, nadav eina chay b'achrais. Here we don't care. He's always going to be chay b'achrais until the money reaches the hand of the temple treasurer, till the wire is received. Because it says the nasan Hashem, which implies that until when the temple receives it, the money is not kodesh. If the money is not kodesh, it's chulin. If it's chulin, it belongs to the pledger. I don't care the words that were used while he made the pledge. Unlike many other designations, that when you designated it, like if a person they end the whole end of the Sechta Shkalim, if a person, we don't do that. A person can take money, which they shouldn't, and they should say, "This is I'm being magdashit." If you make that statement, that money is imbued with kedushas of the temple, and a person can be moil, not by erech and not by damim. Halacha yudalet. Chayav yarachin b'damim. Another than what rights does the temple treasurer have to collect? Memashkin and oisam, they can seize collateral, and they can take the money bal karchan up until everything that he pledged. If you owe me money as a civilian, and even though there are times that I'm allowed to take a mashkin, when I take the mashkin, I cannot go into your house to take it. And when you give it to me, and if you need it at night or a day, I have to give it back. All of the dinim that we learned explicit in the Torah. None of this applies to when the temple takes a collateral. And they have the right to sell everything. The guy says, I don't have money. But you have a house. You have stuff they can take. They can sell land. They can sell movables. They can sell clothing. They can sell furniture. They can sell your slaves, they can sell your animals, and they can take payment from anything that they like. The only thing, if I make a pledge, what cannot be seized and sold is the garments of my wife, not mine, the garments of my children. Even if I did not gift garments to my wife yet, but I bought the material and I gave them to the dyeing plant, cook, that's already considered hers. It's dyed already. It's dyed for her. And we are charedim, we only wear black if we wear black. And that's a blue, that's not for me, that's hers. Even shoes, there are sandals that are new, even though she didn't wear it, you didn't give it. But you bought it for her. You should text my Mendel, that's the only way out. Okay, no, guys, for the people who come right now, this person made a pledge, different types of pledges of money to the temple. They don't have the money. But so what does the temple do? So everything that they own is linked to it. So we're going to see what exactly is theirs and what your married person, what's not yours. So listen to this. So first of all, they seize everything. For why? They're going to sell it to collect a pledge. But what do they have to give back to you? One of yours has to remain yours. Look at the Seder. Your tefillin shel rosh v'shel yad. Lahoyer, we mentioned that the Rambam, Mitamim Yaduam, always mentions the head before the hand, even though it's written in the opposite Seder in the Torah. The only time that Rambam mentions hand before head is when he speaks about the actual putting on the tefillin. But here, tefillin shel rosh v'shel yad. You get one pair of shoes. You get mita leishav alel. They didn't sit on chairs, they sat on beds. And so there was a sitting bed, umita, umatzah. I want you to know, just to know by the Tanoi we have these words. Matzah means a mattress. Mapas means a mat. In other words, when people were balabatish, they had the matzah. When people were impoverished, they slept on straw. So in other words, you give back to the person the type of bed which fits that person's social standing. Which means you give them a mita, but not the matzah, not the mattress that today in America you pay $8,000 for a mattress or foam that they convince you of a mapas. You get a mat, the mat that people use for the schach. That's not kosher because that's it was made to sleep on. Lishanola. Now, what else can they not sell? What
here because he doesn't have money? They still give him his status of a rich person with his mattress.
I love it. Very good point. The guy says he has no money. But we all know that when people say in America they have no money, we are richer than Shlomo HaMelech. We don't have money in America. We don't have money. But this is what the school should do for tuition. Ainly, that's what you got to do. And now, 1 second, you can't take everything. You give this guy enough food for 30 days. So yeah. And you give him enough clothing for 12 months. I think that means one suit. I have to know. But only for him. You can't now. A man is obligated to support his wife. So he cannot claim, 1 second, give me what I need for me to fulfill my chiyuv. You don't do that. That's on you. Even though he's chayiv to have food, to have clothing for his family. He only gets clothing. Now, let's go into the details of clothing. This guy is claiming he doesn't have money to pay his pledge, but he has. In America, there's a minute you pay up to $4,000 for a cheap suit. Right? When we grew up, you paid $80 for a suit. So how do you measure that? So he said like this: if he had clay meshi, if he has silk garments or golden garments, and he's crying poverty, he's driving a Rolls Royce, you take those garments, you sell it, and you buy garments for someone like him. Now, even for him, there's Shabbos garments and there's weekday garments. You buy him weekday garments. Allah, the kids said, don't make pledges that you cannot pay. Allah 17, the uman. Now, what happens if this guy is a working person and he needs tools to be able to make a living? Oh, so now that you give him. But you can't take that away from him. So from whatever he needs, you give him two. You give him two because one will break. If he was a charash, not a chedesh, a charash is a carpenter, then you give him shnei matzodim, shtei megaris, whatever tool he uses, a plane, a saw, two. Because how can he make a living by having one if one will break? We don't say ein moichlin min hamerubin v'loikhlin min hamuat. If he only began with one saw, then you don't have to give him something that he doesn't have. If he has 3 or 4 of another, then the Beis Din gets the temple gets to keep everything up until the final 2. Halacha Yudches, Chamar, not tools, but he's a donkey driver. So he has a donkey, or he's a farmer. Interesting. Guys, because an animal is not a keli. You know what an animal is in the category? Nechasav. Nechasav, you got to sell to pay back your debt. How Yasapan, if he's a sailor, you don't give him his boat. Interestingly, it's not viewed as the tool of my trade. Halacha Yutes. And people who know the business say like this, that if you're going to spend and buy for this Eved fancy clothing, even though you're going to have to spend, let's say, 30 shekel to dress him up, you're going to get, when you sell him, 100 shekel more. The temple is trying to monetize this guy's property. Do you do that? Do you invest any temple money, even though people are telling the temple, if you were to invest a little, you're going to get a very high return? Or they tell them, this cow, if you'll only wait until it's the meat market day, you're going to get another $10 for it. Or this pearl, when it comes to jewelry, b'chlal, we had this in the Gemara many times. In villages, you'll get very little money for jewelry because people learn it's not a need. If you go to big cities, if you'll take it to that location, the people are wealthier. Art. How much is art worth? You have no idea. It can be worth $5. It can be worth $1 million. So if they tell the temple, my goal is, if you'll take it to that place, you'll get a lot of money. Here, no one will pay for anything for it. You don't do that. Temple does not invest time, funds to up the value. They take it and they sell it here and now. And that's based on the pasuk, Shenemar, the Nasan Eso Erkacha Bayoim Ahu Kodesh Lashem. Lerabois Kol Davar Shel Hegdesh She'ein Mefarkis Enoisa. You don't embellish it, which is what you do normally if you are in a business. Temple is not a business. You don't even wait. I'm not embellishing it. I'm just waiting for a better date. You don't do that. Right? You take someone's stock. So they tell you, listen, I know that it is, and next year it'll be worth more. You don't do that. Ein lahekdish ela mekoyim v'shatoi. Halacha yud, final halacha chaf. Amed varam amurim v'metaltel and bavad. The only thing that you sell the here and now, I'm sorry, everything is sold right now in the exception of real estate. Real estate, you can never sell real estate here and now because that's the law. The law is that you have to make announcements. The announcements are made for 60 days. You want for everyone to know that a piece of land is being sold. The more people are aware of the sale of a property, the more potential buyers will come, the more possibility there will be that the seller will get a higher number. Don't sell your house off market. You're going to lose from it. And that's not called embellishment. That's the way land is sold. Maybe the world is different. I'm saying the number 60 today, there's a communication, but the concept is land you have to notify, people have to know that this land is for sale. That's the way you get the value. And all other items, when you're selling it, you're not underselling it, you're putting it on the market right now, and you're getting the correct value. And all of that is to collect this pledge. But prior to collecting your pledge, you have to give back to this person everything that we mentioned in Halacha Yud Daled, beginning with the head tefillin. Halacha Tezvav. Okay, Chevah, that was beautiful. We are learning now the final chapter is a relatively long chapter, but Baruch Hashem, our timing is great. We are learning the 4th chapter of Arachan and Haramim. We're going to move on to a new topic. Here, we're going to speak both about someone who donated to the temple his ancestral field and the halachas of what happens if someone donates to the temple a property that he or she purchased. Stay achuzah versus stay mikvah. Similar to the dinam of erchen, that when a person makes a pledge by using the magical words erki olai or erkachalai, so according to age and gender, there is a specific value that the Torah ascribes to people, which is a big chiddush, not how much is that individual worth. There is a certain crossover when it comes to someone who consecrates a property that they yarshid, going back to what my forefathers inherited when Yeshua led us into the land of Israel. That's called my ancestral field. And if I consecrate it to the Beis HaMikdash and I want to redeem it, as the temple wants it to be redeemed, the temple doesn't need land. This is just a way of donating money to the temple. So there is a specific value that the Torah gives to property, whether it on the market is worth more, whether on the market it's worth less, as we'll see in this chapter with many other. Pratim Perek Dalet has 28 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph. When a person inherits land, that inherited land is going to be called in these halachas as your Sedei Achuzah. All of this is very important. Let me just give another quick intro. These are clear psukim in the Torah that the system that God makes for the Jewish people is that every single Jew owns a piece of property. And even if you were to choose to sell it, aside of very few, but there are exceptional cases, that property will go back to your family on the Jubilee year. So really, sale of such property is really a long-term lease, but it's not always for 49 years. You have to know which year are you in vis-a-vis the closest Yovel year, whether it's 1 year or 49 years. And in the Yovel year, generally, that land will come back to you. Now, what we will also learn is that if a person consecrates a stei achuzah, if no one redeemed it, you will lose that property forever. But let's get there slowly. So you have a stei achuzah. Another type of real estate that you can own is that you bought it. You bought it means that you only bought it until Yovel. Don't forget, I cannot consecrate to God something that I don't own. If I bought a property and I'm magdish it, since I never owned it beyond Yovel, my hegdish is that the temple owns it until Yovel. Whoever is going to redeem it will only pay its value of them purchasing it only until Yovel. Whether I bought it or shezachaboy, it doesn't have to be that I bought it. If I got it as a gift, point is that I did not. It's not my ancestral land. Here mikras for the context of the halachas that we're learning. Stay mikna. So you got to remember: stay achuzah, stay mikna. Now let's begin. The beginning of Perek Dalet is speaking about someone who consecrates. Stay achuzah. The temple doesn't need your land. This is just a means of a person feeling gratitude to God, but he's going to redeem it. Now, You can redeem it. Anyone else can redeem it. We're going to get into those details in a moment. The vart here is that you don't say, well, let's evaluate how much is this land worth in the market. We don't do that. Similar to Dinei Ara Erchei Adam, age, gender, there's a fixed amount. You have to measure the size. And when you redeem it from the temple, the value will be based on the formula that the Torah gives, nothing to do with real market value.
The land becomes hektish until you do the money?
Yes, the land is hektish until someone redeems. Halacha beis, the kamuhu, okay, what's the formula? So we have to begin with the size. Kol mokim shiroi lizroi by chaymer. So guys, the word chaymer, as we'll see in a moment, is referring to a property in which you can plant 30 sa'ah of barley. The Rambam is going to give Amma measurement soon. But another detail, when you're speaking about planting 30 sa'ah of barley, there's different ways of planting. Sometimes you can overly seed, sometimes you can sparsely seed. It means when you are planting it with your hands, so you control, now the machinery are just as good, but then you can control how you spread out the seeds. And you got to be a farmer to appreciate this. It's a type of planting which is precise, not over, not sparse. In other words, the size of land that is needed to plant 30 sa'ah of barley seeds. That amount, erkoi chamishim shekel l'chol shnei yovel. I want to say what that means. Guys, yovel is every 50 years. There are 49 years in between yovel and yovel. The longest stretch of time is if you were magdashit on year number 1, which means you have 49 years until yovel. You redeeming that land, you'll pay 50 shekel. 50 shekel for 49 years. How much is each year? More than a shekel. Shekel would have been 49. Paying 50 for 49 years. Now, he's making it clear, not 50 years. The year of Yovel is not included in that count.
For each year?
It means, Shuki, that if I'm redeeming it, the max amount of time possible, which is in the first year, which means there's 49 years until the next Yovel. For 49 years, I got to pay 50 shekel. Which the Echadam now.
Not a lot of money.
No, not a lot of money at all. Yeah. By the way, Danny, same thing with Erchei Adam. The Torah says that what 50 shekel for the highest number. No, it's much less than market value. Much less than market value. The Echad HaMagdish saw the Torah. Doesn't matter whether your property is the best land, that no one else in Israel has a property like yours, like your apartment in Yerushalayim. With all the noise. Yerushalayim is the greatest city in the world. But you have the worst field in the world. That's the word of Erechin, that the Torah gives the value. Now we're going to get into a couple of details. That the shekel, which the Torah speaks about, is equivalent to the word sela, to the coin sela that the sages speak about. And even though we'll see later that they actually, because of inflation, they upped. I want you to know that a sela now is you have to take 384 barley corns in silver. That is the weight of a sela. Okay. The word geira that the Torah speaks about is the same coin that the sages called ma'ah. Even though we know, sifu ala shekel, and they made it like a sela. We just had this recently. And once the Chachamim said, because of inflation, and you can argue between then and now, there was even a lot more inflation. We don't change that right now. Because whenever we speak about shekel sela, we are speaking about silver equivalent to the weight of 384 barley corns. Sela is made out of 4 dinarim. Dinar is made out of 6 ma'ah. The word ma'ah actually means a sixth. A ma'ah is made out of 2 pudyonim. Why would the Rambam saying this over here? It's good to remember this. But here you're going to make that math, and you're going to see that every sela has 48 pudyons. 48 pudyons. Now, really, you're paying 50 shekel for 49 years. But I want you to know that if you go to a banker and you want to give him pudyons and get a sela, he's not going to take from you 48 and be happy. He's going to take from you 49. For two reasons. First of all, epis geld the banker has to make. Not like today's bankers that are ganov and mamish. Then they took epis a little bit. And because sometimes the silver actually, they paid in silver. Sometimes the silver gets rubbed out a little bit. So to make sure at least he doesn't lose money. Since if you were to make the exchange and you would have to give pudyoins to get a seller, you would have to give 49. That's what we're getting at. So every year is the equivalent to one seller and to one pudyoin. Sha'af seller is only 48. Do your math. Nevertheless, since he wouldn't accept 49. Today you go to a bank and you give them a place 100 pennies. They'll give you $1 bill. Then they would take 100. They would take more, a little bit more. Therefore, it works perfect. That's what we're getting to. So now we established that every year, this size land for 1 year is worth one seller and one pudyon. Now, hold on. The word chomer is the same word as koir or kur. That's the way my teachers pronounced it. A kur is 30 sa. A kur is also 2 lesach. Lesach is a half a kur. A lesach is 15 sa. A lesach is 15 sa. Nimsa ha-chomer, shloishim sa. Another measurement which is the same, 10 ephahs, an ephah. When you separate challah, just know these words. So from how much flour do you have to separate challah from a asida so ephah? 43x, 0.3x. What does that mean in pounds? A machloikas, right? Between 2.5 and 5 pounds. That's why we in Lubavitch, we don't make a bracha. We separate challah, we don't make a bracha. You have to get familiarized with the words of Chazal when it comes to measurements. 10 ephahs, kol shalish sign is 1 ephah. Okay, now that Rambam also continues, we already explained in Al Shabbos. Shahamakim sheyesh b'shiburei chamishim amal in 50 cubits by 50 cubits, guys. Every cubit is 18 or 19 inches. You can plant 1 saw. What are we saying, guys? That a chaymer is 30 saw. A quart is 30 saw. Mizara saw comes out. Limsos lamed. Now that Rambam is coming to the point. Shahamakim sheyesh b'shiburei chamisha b'shivim elef amal. A place that has approximately 75,000 square cubits, which is also, if you want to just not speak about the squaring of the cubits, you just want to measure width and length. It's approximately 274 cubits by 274 cubits. That is an area in which this chaymer so'idim could be planted. And for that, again, you got to pay for 49 years, 50 shekel. Very good. Let's further specify. Halacha 5. You consecrated the stei achuza and let's say only 8 years. We don't include the year of yovel. As we explained, it's the 49 years in between. So anyone, by the way, not only the one who consecrated, anyone who wants to redeem it has to pay. By the way, this is a great deal, guys. People will jump on this. They're going to pay 8 saloim and 8 pudyoinos. Guys, it could be that sometimes you're going to overpay, but it doesn't sound like a large amount of money. It's for 8 years, you're paying a lease, a seller, for sure, it's a very small amount of money. It's like a symbolic amount of money almost. Now there's another din, and this din is not unique to Erchei Sadois. This is a general rule that when the one who consecrated something that belonged to him or to her to the temple, if they are the ones redeeming it, they always have to add a fifth. How do you measure a fifth? Not the way you think you measure a fifth. It's called a fifth from the outside, not a fifth from the inside. So if it's $100, a fifth from the inside would mean 20. A fifth from the outside is you add 25. Now you have a total of 125. 25 is a fifth from 125. So let's go over here to the 8. Instead of you giving 8 and 8 sulaim, how much? What's a fifth? 10 sulaim and 10 pudyonos.
This is the limit of what they're allowed to charge.
Not what they're allowed to. That's all. That's the number. Can't take more.
Even if the market rents are 100.
That's the din. That if a person says my stei achuza belongs to the temple, that is exactly what they're pledging. People knew that. Really, why do I have to go crooked?
They don't get rented necessarily to that. They could rent it to anybody out there.
Don't say rented, redeeming. Let's use the word redeeming.
Oh, so the next 8 years belongs to that other person.
The temple, if someone wants to redeem it, the temple doesn't have the right to say we're not allowing it to be redeemed. The way I understand it, people wanted to make a gesture. People are very grateful for the fact that God gave them a field. Really, the guy could have just says, I'm giving to the temple 10. 8 years before Yovel, the guy can give 10 suloim. Why do you have to make everyone crazy? Because it's when you're trying to tell God that I acknowledge that what I own belongs to you. And now I'm gonna give its value, or I'm giving my value. Why is the guy saying it? Because it's a statement of bittul. No me. I belong to you, God. Okay. So therefore, if you have to add a halachic fifth, then if it's 8 years before the yovel, nice and eser sulayim, but eser put yoinos. Lefi, because the owners always have to add a fifth. Which really means you're adding a fourth. Now, what happens if the wife, is she considered someone else, or is she considered the same? She's considered the same as the husband. Or any one of the heirs, which will be the ones inheriting this land after the passing of the one who was Magdashit. They are also, in this context, considered, you were the one that consecrated it, and you have to add this fifth. Halacha vav. Nisher la yovet arba shanim. Okay, so then any other person other than the consecrator gives 4 sulayim for pudyonis for every chaymer. And by the way, if it's half a chaymer, you give half. You know, that's the measurement from where you make all of the cheshbonis. You give 5. Comes out, you're giving a selling on the pudyon for every year. However, you don't get to make a payment plan. In Brazil, when you buy a table, you pay it out at a echveis in 60 months. It's a culture. Everything is paid out. No, here you got to pay it all up front. You can't say it's a seller and a pudyan a year. Every year I'll give the temple. No, the Edonois and Shana B'Shana. Elonois Hakoil Ke'achad. Halacha 7. Now another detail. Nishar Beinoy the Beinoy Shana. What happens if there's only 1 year left? Guys, you don't get to pay one seller and one pudyan. You have to redeem at least 2 years. As it says, the coin makes the calculation. Alpi, listen to this word. Hashanim in the plural, that are noisarois in the plural. In other words, ein niftas bigger in kesev. You know what that means, guys? That doesn't mean that if I'm a year before the yovel, I can't redeem it. You know what it means? I got to pay the whole 50 shekel. Oh, now what happens if it's a year and a half? Halacha 8. So the gizbar is not going to charge me. We don't count months. He rounds off the months. Even though it's only 18 months before Yovel, he says, no, it's as if it's 2 years before Yovel. At least that. And you give 2 Saloim and 2 Padyonis if you're not the owner. If you're the owner, you add a fifth. No, the Gizbar has the power to say, I'll round off up as if the few months is still a full year. And now all you have to give, if you're not at before the 5th, is 2 shkalim. See, the Rambam purposefully changes also shekel and selah, because it always means the same, even though the biblical selah is a lesser value than the rabbinic selah. But once the Chachamim added, it's the higher number. And why don't you give a half? Give a year and a half? Give a half a selah, half? No. You don't calculate months. Why? Because the Torah says based on the years. From where we are medayik, shonim atam chashav lahegdish, atam chashav chadoshim. Allah na lefikach ein roiv adam lahegdish today lefnei hayovel. Don't do it less than 2 years. And if you did it less than 2 years, it's a kedushin. The ein and niftis beginning in kesav. You cannot reduce the amount. Not reducing the amount, Danny, doesn't mean you can't redeem it. Not reducing the amount means if the gizber doesn't want to round off the months, you know what he's going to tell you? What do we have in years? 1 year. You don't get to pay the price of 1 year for 1 year. If there's only 1 year, you can redeem it, pay the whole money. And imloy peda'a. We're getting to the next step. What happens if you don't redeem it? Not only you, Shuki, if no one redeems it, this will be from the rare instances that a person can lose their ancestral field. I'm not saying it's not a bad loss, because what really happens is it won't belong to the temple. It's going to belong to certain kohanim, as we'll explain. It will become their property. So when you say kohanim and Leviim did not own property, not so simple. The Leviim owned the 6 cities, the 48 cities. The Kohanim ended up becoming very wealthy. With land, as we'll explain in a moment. So 1 second. So who cares? No, a person should not do that. A person should be careful with his money. You want to make this gesture of consecrating your land, do it 2 years before. You understand? Anyways, halacha yud. If you made that consecration on the Yovel year, it's garnished. That is by an Israelite. But the Kohen and the Levi, if they make a consecration on property that they own, because they do end up, they could own property, even on the Yovel year, it is consecrated. And you know why that Rambam is explaining in Halacha Yud Aleph? Because Keshem Shagoy Alam Lo'olam, we're going to see the rules regarding Kahanim and Leviim are not the rules that we just mentioned right now, that if you did not redeem it, it now belongs to the Kohanim. That's if you are an Israelite. If you are a Kohen or a Levi, you can always redeem it. And since you can always redeem it, you can always be Magdashit. We're going to see a Kohen and a Levi can redeem it even after the Yovel left. There's a whole different set of laws for Kohanim and Levi. Halacha Yud Beis. If you consecrate your field right after Yovel, if you only want to pay 48, same thing, Shuka. I don't want to pay 40. I don't want to pay 50. I don't want to pay 50. I want to pay 49 and 49 because 1 year passed. For 1 year to pass, same thing. In the beginning, a full year has to pass, not a few months. If only a few months pass, you still owe the whole year. You're not menaka a half a seller. You don't get to pay half of that year. Fine. In other words, if I consecrate my stay achuzah during the year after Yovel, until that year ends, what's the redemption money? 50 shekel. Halacha Yud Gimel. Another din. Now let's go into you pay 50 shekel for every chaymer besa item. How do you measure land? Let me tell you the challenge of measuring land. Many properties have on them certain protrusions, there's certain indentations, or there's certain rocks upon which you cannot plant. Are they included in the count or are they not included in the count? When you measure the field, the places that are fit to have product sown in it. If you have rocks that are protruding 10 handbreadths tall, or if you have nekoyim, if you have certain hollows that are filled with water that are deep 10 tvachim or more, they are b'chlal not measured with it. But if they are less, since they're so insignificant, they are measured with it. Now, but there isn't any water. They are measured by themselves. And you know what you do with that land? You don't get this formulation of 50 sela. You know what you do? You ask people in real estate, if I were to buy that strip of land, how much is it worth on the market? That's the money you have to pay. That's called lefi shavyam. It's excluded from this anomaly of erchei sodos. Halacha 50. If the field was filled with trees, even though you didn't say that you are giving the trees also to the temple. So first of all, you also consecrated the trees. Why is that? Because there is a rule that when a person makes a gift to the holy temple, he does so with a generous spirit. Since the trees are on this land, he meant to consecrate both the land and the field. However, when you come to redeem it, the Torah only gives you this formulation, which is really a discounted price, only for the land, not for the trees. So you got to have someone who knows real estate to tell the temple how much are just the trees worth. And that you pay the real market value. How much are they worth from now until Yovel? And as we mentioned, via erka, sela, and a pudyan for every year, according to the size of Zerachayim, as we explained. Halacha 16. What happens if I consecrate a field that's not fit to be sown? These are fields that are called terashin with a test. It's called a rocky terrain. They're not included in this din. You got to redeem them for their market value, more or less. No, this formulation is only for fit to be sown land. If you only consecrated trees, then you have to, if you want to redeem them, pay their market value. Halacha 17. If in every 50 by 50 amma you have there 3 trees, and you consecrated, and you didn't specify, I'm only consecrating the trees. Now, trees have to live off land. And the correct amount of land for trees is this formula. If it's grown trees, 50 by 50 amma for 3 trees. So if I consecrated 3 trees in such a patch of land, we presume that I gave to the temple both the trees and the land. And now what? Oh, now when I redeem it, I got to pay for the land, the formula of the 50 shekel. And for the trees, I pay the market value. But if the trees were either netuyes kol shloishi lanas biyasim besoy bepachais, which means if they were not spread out evenly, so if they were not planted, kederech trees are planted in land. You know what that normally means? It normally means that people plant trees and they plan to sell the trees. So they don't care for the long term. So these trees don't include the land. Or even if they were properly spread out, but I didn't say 3 at a time, I only said 1, then we don't presume that he also included the land. He only meant to include the trees themselves. And by the way, if I have 3 trees spread out in the 50 by 50 amas, and there are little saplings in between them, they were also included in my pledge, even though I never spoke about the saplings. If it included the land, if it did not include the land, then it's only the trees. Halacha 18. Higdish choyelanis. At first, he consecrated only the trees, and then he consecrated the land. Same system. Doesn't make a difference. When you redeem the trees, you got to pay the correct value, the market value. If and when you will redeem the land, then you got to pay it based on the formula that we had above. Now we're moving on to a new topic. Atkan, if a person consecrated their ancestral property, halacha yutes. In contrast, if a person consecrates land, hamagdish stei achuzase. Oh no, not yet. Still stei achuza. Atkan, if you redeemed it. Now, what happens if you don't redeem it? You're magdish your ancestral land, and the year of Yovel comes, and no one redeemed it. You know what happens now? Harei hi kachas yad hegdish. It's under the hands of the hegdish. Now, over the years, beginning with Moshe Rabbeinu, culminating with Shmuel Hanavi and David HaMelech, we have now 24 art families of Kohanim, and they make a rotation system in which one family works in the temple for 1 week. The change of the guard is in middle of Shabbos. A year doesn't have 48 weeks. A year doesn't have a consistent number of weeks because we learned Kiddush HaChodesh. You can have a 12-month year, a 30-month year. You can have a 354-day year. You can have a 386 year. I think you can even have a 354 minimum. You can have whichever mishmer of Kohanim are in service when the year of Yovel enters, that mishmer will become the owners of that land. HaKohanim but they have to give money for it. Now, how much money do they give? The shuki, this erech. Because she'ein hegdish yoytze b'lei pidyon, because you can't have hegdish go to anyone, even to Kohanim, without someone redeeming it, and the money that they give will go to the Bedek Habayis as if the owner gave the money or another person. It goes to the same temple fund, but the point is that now this land will belong and be divided amongst the Kohanim of that group. Now, if the one who consecrated it, he was the one that redeemed it, it goes back to its owners, and the erech also goes to the Bedek Habayis, as we explained. Furthermore, so imagine the son redeems it, even though the son, we said, has to pay the 5th. But it only remains the sons until Yovel. When Yovel comes, it goes back to the father. But if the daughter is the one that redeemed it, or any other relative, or even a non-Jew, point is that they are not the ones that will be receiving Yerusha. You get it? From the consecrator. So what happens now? I'll tell you what happens now. If I consecrated my property and you redeemed it, I have the right up until Yovel to give you the money that you gave him to take it from me. So then it's back in his hands, in his family. But if the loiga olam miyadan, that means I consecrated the field. You, even my daughter, she doesn't stand to inherit from it if a person has sons. So if she redeemed it, and I did not buy it back from her, nor was then El Higia Yovel Hitachas Yad Abbas or Shar Karoiva. In other words, it doesn't matter that it's a relative. The point is that it's not in someone that's my Yarshin, or even in the hands of a non-Jew.
Including other Yidden.
Other Yidden.
Between Krovim and nothing.
Yes. So it doesn't make a difference. Now what happens? Goes back to Hegdish. Wow. In other words, I better get it back. The
There's no way they would go to another Yisrael.
it goes to the Kahanim again.
So what's
Another person can redeem it up until
your
Yovel.
field that you donated, right? And now I have it until Yovel.
That's right.
The Yovel goes back to them
To the Kahanim.
forever.
The Einoi Chayzeres Leba'ala La'olam. Here also, Ela Tehei Achuzas. Guys, these are mamash psukim in the Chumash. Ela Tehei Achuzas LaKohanim. Shneimar, as it says, V'hoya Hasoda B'tseisei B'yovel LaKoyen Tehei Achuzas. Now, in this case, it's even better. Someone else already redeemed it. So the Kohanim don't even have to pay any money. As long as the Bedek Habayis got its value, they're good. And they become the new owners. Now, there's only one exception. That's only if the consecrator was a Yisrael. Not a Kohen, not a Levi. If it was a Kohen, if the owner is a Kohen, people ask, how can a Kohen own land? Now you learned how. Because this guy Zayda or his father or he, in the past Yovel, got a piece of property. If they now consecrated the property, and even if the Yovel went, and how ironic that means that people say that the bond between the land of Israel and the Yidden are eternal. True. But Kohanim have no rights in land. When they do get land, the connection that they have to the land is more than a Yisrael. Halacha Chabeis. And the husband was the one that redeemed it from Hegdish. You get it? And Digia Yovel, and she did not buy it back from her husband. How do we view that? In other words, do we say that the husband is someone else or not? Now, don't forget, guys, that our husband yarshins from his wife midrabanan. I'm not mistaken. Maybe that's the suffix. Now, what do we do with this doubt? This becomes a classic doubt. Who owns money? There's no kedusha here. So whoever is the muhza gets to keep it. So therefore, if the woman right away possesses it after Yovel, meaning after Yovel enters, then the Kohanim cannot kick her out. If the Kohanim take possession of it, then she cannot kick the Kohanim out. What happens if a Kohen is the one that redeemed it? Well, until Yovel, the owner can buy it back from the Kohen. After Yovel comes, and it's in the hand of the Kohen cannot say, listen, since now the owner, the consecrator, did not redeem it, and it's given to the Kohanim, I'm already your Kohen. Let it stay by me. It doesn't work that way. He cannot say, since what do we say? As we learned. What does it mean it goes to the Kohanim? It doesn't go to all the Kohanim. It's Tinasim LaKohanim that are serving in the Mishmar in that time that Yovel begins. Rosh Hashanah of Yovel of Shabbat, when Yovel Rosh Hashanah, that's when Yovel begins. Not Yom Kippur, even though certain dinim only going to apply. If Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos, what's the question? Shabbos is the day where there is an exchange of guard. So you give it to the guys that are finishing their week of service, or you're going to give it to the Chevra, or you will divide it. You don't divide it. You give it to the ones that are finishing their service. You know why? Because it goes to the Kohanim by the entry of Yovel. The change of the guard is before Musa. Because it's from the entry of Yovel, the night going into Rosh Hashanah. Halacha 25. This din is only hasada b'tzeisel by Yovel. The ain't elu sada. However, if you're magdish to Russian, this rocky terrain is excluded from the formulation of 50 selah for 49 years. But it's a sub. Yes, that's sudden. Again, even though Chiddush is, even though the numbers will be different. Halacha Chav Vav. Now is the new second top part of this chapter, which is very small, is not you consecrated your ancestral field, but you were magdish, a property that you bought. Don't forget, when I bought property in the Holy Land, Bisman Shah Yovel Noyig, I never bought it forever. Not America. I only own it until the Yovel. Then it goes back to the original owner. If I'm magdish it, again, I cannot be magdish something that I don't own. So now, halach chavav, Kate Tzadin Magdish Tei Miknasai, nothing as we learned above. Number one, Shamin Oisa Bidomel. If I want to redeem it, I don't give this formula that the Torah gave. No, the Beis Din asks real estate agents, how much is this property worth? Meaning, again, not how much is it worth forever. It's a whole different cheshbon because really it's until Yovel. All real estate transactions, if they're not with your ancestral field, is only until Yovel, and not 50 years from when you bought it. If anything that's sold or bought a half a year before Yovel is only a half a year transaction. That's it. And then anyone can redeem it. If even if the one who consecrated it redeems it, he doesn't add the fifth. You know why he doesn't add the fifth? Because it's not really his to begin with. The money, it's like a lease. It's a whole different system. No one in the world has a system. I know the Chinese are very much into whatever you buy is only yours for 99 years.
Hawaii, by the way, buy a house there. It's on a 100-year.
That's the Chinese, but that's from when you bought it. But that's from when you bought it. Here, it's not. It's you don't have 50 years from when you bought it. See, the cheshbon of 99 years is they're saying you're not gonna live that long, so you don't care. It's like what's it called, a reverse mortgage. No, here it's yovel. That means if you make a transaction a year before yovel, the whole transaction in real estate is only for 1 year.
Right.
It's a whole different system. And what happens when yovel comes, whether you redeemed it, whether you didn't redeem it, it's going to go to the original owners. Whether someone redeemed it from the hands of the temple treasurer, whether it was not redeemed, I don't care where it is when yovel comes in. Why? Because of the rule. You cannot consecrate an article that does not belong to you. Halacha 27. You
see, the original owners never
consecrated it.
They just sold it.
That's right.
Which wasn't really a sale.
Which is not really exactly. Now, when you cannot use the formula of 50 shekel for 49 years for base chaymer zera so'orim, so like we learned in the previous chapter, when you make a sale, when temple evaluates machrizan aleh shishim yom netzufim. When you're buying something from the temple, how do you evaluate real estate? Here in LA, you don't need 60 days. Here, maybe now that we're in a recession or not, who cares? You put your house in the market and you sell it very quick. Land, normally, the halacha says you need 60 days and everyone should know that you're selling the property. And when do they make announcements? They make announcements in the morning. When do they make it in the morning? When people are going to work. How do you communicate to people? When the people are gathered. When are people gathered? When they're going to work and when they come back from work. Somebody put a big signages on the roads leading to the fields. People worked in the fields. You have to mark that property with boundaries. And when they announce it, they say, this is, they don't just put it on the market. They give a number. The way you sell real estate right now, then people begin to bid above it. These are the boundaries. This is what it is. This is what it's worth. And whoever wants can come and buy it. Final halacha 28, chavches, koyach, halakeyach, Sodom Aviv. Reuven bought a field from Yaakov. You get it? Or it doesn't have to be Reuven from Yaakov. What happens if Chaim has no sons and the closest relative that will inherit will be his brother? The one who will end up inheriting when this one will decease. So the closest in line to the throne, you understand, is the one that bought it and he consecrated it. Now listen to this. The question is not if the consecration happened after the father passed away or Marisha. He could have consecrated it when his father was still alive or Marisha. point is that now when the Yovel year comes, listen to what's happening. Now, had he not bought it and consecrated it, he would have been the owner. How do we view this property? We view it like a stei achuzah, and he will lose it if he doesn't pay up. And how much will he pay up, guys? Again, if he has 2 years before the yovel, 2 sell and 2 put yoins. If it's a year and a half, the Gizbert can give him a discount, 2 years, or he can tell him pay the whole 50. Why did the Torah have to say such an expression? That's to imply, when don't you apply the din of stei achuzah only by a field that's not even fit to become a stei achuzah? In our case, if you would not have consecrated it, it would have been your stei achuzah, and therefore it's bound by this law that if you don't redeem it, my friends, it goes to the kahanim. Lo olam v'ed. All right. Now, when you learn Pashas B'chokaisai, I'm a chayah. Huh? Marishav means, Danny, that let's say I gave Reuven is Ben Yaakov. But what happens if Yaakov has no children yet? And if he passes away, who will be the one who's going to yarshim from him? Let's